A millionaire went to do his laundry at 2 a.m. and found a child curled up like he'd been thrown away, sleeping between the spinning machines. He didn't wake him, didn't touch him. He just left something behind. And no one could have guessed that very act would save a life and shake an entire city. The city at 2 a.m. holds a kind of silence not everyone can bear. It's not the gentle kind, but the kind that makes your heartbeat echo in your chest. On an empty street, a silver SUV glided slowly past a row of streetlights, casting pale yellow halos. It stopped in front of the Linden Wash and Dry Laundromat, right next to a convenience store that had gone dark hours ago. Graham Callahan turned off the engine, pulled the keys from the ignition, and exhaled. His hands were cold, despite the heater still blowing. His shirt sleeves were neatly rolled, collar buttoned all the way up, as if he had never allowed himself to appear casual, not even while doing laundry in the middle of the night. The washing machine in his estate had broken 2 days ago. The housekeeper was on extended leave. So here was Graham, the man who once led a billion-dollar tech empire, quietly carrying a basket of clothes, driving himself into the depths of the city to a small public laundromat. Not because he couldn't afford help, not because he had no other option, but because he needed silence. And the quietest places are the ones where no one knows your name. The laundromat was still lit. A line of washers and dryers clanged and whirred. The familiar smell of cheap detergent and rusted metal clung to his collar the moment he walked in. He picked the back corner, set down the basket, and began loading clothes into the machine like a man who had done this 1,000 times. The way he folded each shirt before placing it inside, methodical, deliberate, not a single wasted motion, was the same way he used to run his company. Precise, swift, emotionless. But as Graham bent down to open the cap on the detergent bottle, something caught his eye. Across the room, on a wooden bench in front of washer number 3, lay a child. The boy was curled on his side, head resting against the gently vibrating machine, as if it was the only thing left offering warmth. He clutched a crumpled red plastic bag to his chest, the kind you get at discount grocery stores. His coat was old and torn at the shoulder, knees pulled tight to his chest, shoes dirty, hair matted and drooping over his forehead. If you weren't paying attention, you might have mistaken him for a forgotten bundle of laundry. Graham stood frozen, still holding the cap of the laundry detergent bottle. For a brief moment, he thought he was looking at his own son, Ethan. He used to fall asleep, just like that, curled up on the living room sofa after a bout of the flu. But Ethan was gone. It had been 4 years, and this was another boy. Graham looked around. No other adults in the laundromat. No sound of a car pulling up outside. No customers walking by to check their machines. Just the hum of washers and his own heartbeat slowing down. He took a step closer, careful not to startle, not rushing. In his mind, he sorted through the possibilities. A lost child, asleep while waiting for his mother, a homeless family, abandoned. He bent down slightly and called, "Hey there, sweetheart?" No response. He tried again, softer this time. Still no movement from the child. Graham lowered himself to one knee. He didn't touch the boy. He just looked closer. The small hand clutched a red duffel bag. Not like someone holding onto a belonging, more like a memory. The bag was covered in layers of duct tape. One corner was slightly open. Inside were a few neatly folded clothes, a tattered stuffed animal, and a photograph creased down the middle. Graham didn't dig. He wasn't the kind of man who intruded, especially not on a child sleeping curled up in a laundromat. He stood, stepped back a few paces. "This isn't my place," he told himself. Yes, he'd told himself that many times since Ethan died. Don't get involved. Don't save anyone. Don't break again." But the boy's eyes, even though they were closed, kept him rooted to the spot. Graham returned to the washer, poured the detergent, pressed the button. Done. But he didn't leave. He pulled a sandwich from his coat pocket, the one he'd brought to eat while waiting for his laundry. Hesitated for a second, then walked back toward the boy and placed the sandwich beside the red bag. Then quietly, he took a business card from his wallet. The back was blank. He wrote, "My name is Graham. If you need help, call this number. No one will hurt you." He tucked the card gently next to the sandwich. He didn't expect the boy to call. He just hoped that when the child woke up in the morning, he'd know someone had stopped. Someone had seen him. As Graham walked out of the laundromat, he glanced back one last time. The boy still hadn't moved. But the red duffel bag, it had been pulled a little closer to his chest, and Graham had no idea that in that one moment of hesitation, he had just changed that boy's life forever. 3 days later, Graham Callahan drove down Maple Avenue out of habit. It was a Saturday morning, with a fine mist falling from the sky, quiet, but the kind that soaked through even a thick wool sweater. He didn't have any particular plans, or rather, he had deliberately made none since the night at the laundromat. The red bag and the child curled up beside the machines had returned to him in sleep for 2 nights straight. Not as nightmares, just a scene that played over and over until it haunted him. The child lying still, and Graham walking away further and further, until he vanished completely. He pulled over when he spotted the faded sign for the West Haven Community Center, where he'd once helped fund an upgrade to the electrical system a few years back. Nearby, a line of people stood in orderly rows beneath a tin awning, waiting for the free breakfast. Most were homeless. A few were out-of-work laborers. Some were young women, clutching babies wrapped in thin blankets. And then he saw the boy, 7th in line, clutching that same red plastic bag, now torn along the edge. His coat, too worn to fend off the rain, his hair wet and matted across his forehead. The boy stood completely still, not asking, not speaking, just there, like a motionless figure amid a sea of unrest. Graham stepped slowly out of the car. He didn't open an umbrella. The rain fell lightly onto his hair, but the chill wasn't enough to stop him. He moved toward the line, stopping a few feet from the boy. No phone in hand, no words, just watching. And then the boy looked up. His eyes met Graham's for a single second, but that second was enough. Enough for Graham to know the boy recognized him. Not the way you recognize an old friend, but the way a child who doubts the whole world might still remember someone who once left behind a piece of bread and a business card. That look, Graham hadn't seen anything like it since the last night Ethan lay in the ICU. It was the look of a child who trusts no one, but still hopes something, anything might come. And that same look, in an instant, turned to fear. The boy turned and ran. No warning, no plea for food, no glance back. The red bag bounced against his side as his small feet darted into the alley beside the shelter. Graham reacted almost on instinct. "Hey, wait!" He pushed through the line, stumbling over the slick curb, but not stopping. He turned where the boy had vanished, a narrow alley between 2 low brick buildings, damp and thick with the smell of burnt plastic and old trash. The footsteps grew fainter. A tin can clattered across the sidewalk. Then silence. Graham stopped. His heart pounded not from exertion, but from a feeling too familiar, just like the time Ethan disappeared in the supermarket only for a few minutes, but a memory that had never let him go. "Son," he called out, then fell quiet. No answer. He slowed his steps, scanning every corner, every trash bin, every cracked doorway. Nothing but silence. Then at the far end of the alley, a figure crouched against the brick wall, raising a hand in a slow wave. Graham turned, alert. It was an old man, worn denim jacket, hood pulled halfway over his face, eyes squinting as if they'd seen through time itself. "Kid's gone," the man said. "You know that boy?" Graham stepped closer. "Who around here doesn't? His name's Micah." Graham froze. For the first time, the boy had a name, Micah. Short, soft, but holding something too big for such a small frame. "He's been wandering these streets for weeks now. Doesn't talk to anyone. Kids like that, they're usually scared of grown-ups." "But I don't think—" "He's scared of you." Graham frowned, part surprised, part skeptical. "How would you know?" The old man shrugged, pulling a damp cigarette from his pocket and placing it between his lips without lighting it. "Other day, I saw him pick up a scrap of paper, read it, then tucked it into his pocket like it was gold. I'm guessing it was from you." Graham exhaled slowly. The business card. The boy had kept it. His father once promised he'd pick him up from the shelter. Never came back. Dead now, or so I heard. "And the boy? He's still waiting?" "Yeah. Every morning he shows up quietly, stands at the end of the line like a shadow, clutching that red bag tight in his arms, eyes fixed on the gate. But then, just as it's almost his turn to get food, he walks away. Doesn't take a thing. Not because he's full, but because he's afraid that if he leaves even for a minute, his father might come and miss him." Graham felt his chest tighten. Not because of the story, but because of the past it yanked back up. Ethan used to wait for him like that too, right in front of the school gate, on the day of an important meeting Graham couldn't reschedule. Back then, he thought, it's just a few minutes, but those few minutes are now forever. "Micah." Graham repeated the name, as if trying to pin it to a memory. The old man nodded and stood up. "If you truly care, stop chasing him. A kid like that only trusts those who don't push." "I'm not pushing," Graham said softly. "I just want to make it right." The old man gave a dry, bitter chuckle, then turned to walk away. "It's late, but who knows? Maybe there's still a child waiting for that. One who just doesn't know how to ask." Back at his car, Graham stood for a long time in the rain before opening the door. Across the street, the line was still long. The charity breakfast was still going. But that empty seventh spot where Micah used to stand felt like a crack in the city's daily indifference. Graham didn't know what he was doing, but he knew this. If that boy wasn't there tomorrow morning, he would never forgive himself. It started pouring just before midnight. Graham Callahan didn't turn on the windshield wipers. He sat motionless in the car, letting the streaks of rain slide down the glass like smudged trails of blood. He hadn't been able to concentrate all day, missed every meeting, couldn't read a single line of a report. One name kept playing on repeat in his mind: Micah, and that image of the boy standing among the line of the poor, then bolting as if Graham was someone who might erase him from the face of the earth. He had no more choices. Graham could no longer just watch from a distance. Tonight, he needed to know where Micah was living, and how. He didn't turn on the interior light, just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, even though the engine was off, eyes locked on the narrow alleyway, the one the old man Leroy had pointed to earlier that morning. The brown paper bag on the passenger seat rustled gently every time the wind shrieked past. Inside were a soft neck pillow, a clean fleece blanket, a bottle of liquid cough medicine, and a small bag of oatmeal cookies with peanut butter filling the kind Ethan used to love. Graham didn't know what Micah liked, but he knew a child sleeping outside in November would need these things. He picked up the flashlight, opened the door, didn't rush. Beneath his feet, the ground was soaked. Wet trash and rotting leaves clung to the soles of his leather shoes. He wasn't wearing one of his usual tailored coats. He'd put on an old army jacket from his days as a college intern. At the very least, it made him look less like an outsider. At the far end of the alley, past a stack of scrap bins, Graham stopped in front of an old shipping container rusted at the base, long forgotten by some delivery company. The door wasn't locked. A blue plastic tarp had been stretched loosely across the entrance, weighed down at the bottom by a few bricks. He bent down and lifted the tarp gently. In the low beam of the flashlight, Micah was asleep. The boy lay curled on his side, back resting against a pile of flattened cardboard boxes, with layers of old cloth beneath him. The red backpack was still clutched to his chest, like letting go of it might mean letting go of everything left in his world. Dust clung to his cheeks. His hair was messy, and his small hands were scratched. His lips trembled slightly, as if caught in a dream. Graham swallowed hard. He saw himself in that moment, not the man he was now, but the one from 4 years ago, sitting beside Ethan's hospital bed, powerless as the boy's body cooled beneath the IV lines. He hadn't been able to keep his son alive, but now, here he was standing in front of another child, alive and forgotten. Graham quietly set the supply bag down beside the shipping container. Every movement was deliberate, no sound, no risk of waking the boy. He unscrewed the cap on the cough medicine and tucked it neatly inside the cookie tin. He placed a pillow near the boy's head without touching him. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't family. He wasn't a savior. He was just a man who had once let the most important thing slip through his hands. Before leaving, Graham bent low and looked at Micah for a long moment. The light from the nearby street lamp cast a soft glow over the child's face, exhausted eyes, lips pressed tight, and an arm clinging to the small red duffel like it was the last thing he had. And then, Micah whimpered, "Dad, Dad, don't go." The words were hoarse, like they'd been pulled from the depths of a heavy dream. The boy's breathing grew fast and shallow. He curled inward, and tears slipped from the corners of his tightly shut eyes. Graham felt his stomach knot, like something had yanked him back into that stark white hospital room all those years ago. Ethan had called out the same way, lost in a fever dream, while Graham had been stuck on a video call out in the hallway, just outside the ICU. This time, Graham didn't walk away. He stepped forward, reaching gently for Micah's shoulder, just to reassure him, just to say, "I'm here," just to avoid repeating the mistake he would never forgive himself for. But the second his fingertips were about to graze the boy's shoulder, Micah bolted upright. He scrambled backward until his back hit the container wall, eyes wide with panic, like a cornered animal. His hand clutched the red bag tight, his chin trembling. "No, don't. I didn't steal anything. Micah, hey, don't take me away. My dad's coming back. He promised." The boy screamed and darted outside. His feet slipped on the damp ground, but he kept running. Graham shouted after him, "Micah! No one's taking you. You did nothing wrong. Wait!" But the sound of Micah's footsteps vanished into the wind. Graham ran a few yards, but he already knew he wouldn't catch up. He stopped, bracing his hand against his knee, breath uneven, not from exhaustion, but from the crushing weight of failure tightening around his chest. 10 minutes later, he returned to the container. No sign of Micah. The supply bag lay open, dragged to one side. The bottle of cough syrup had rolled onto the dirt. The pillow had been kicked askew. Graham didn't tidy up. He sat down beside it, leaned his back against the cold metal wall, and stared up at the starless sky. Why? Why would a 7-year-old boy react like that to a gentle hand on his shoulder? Why would he scream as if someone had once torn him away from someone he loved? Graham didn't speak. He just sat in silence. By the time the clock struck 1:45 a.m., he was still there keeping watch over an empty space, as if his presence alone could hold the soul of the place together. The next morning, as the sunlight crept into the narrow alley, Graham returned. Micah wasn't there, but the red bag had been pulled deeper into the corner of the container and covered with a new blanket. Micah had come back, and he hadn't run. Ever since that night, Graham sat silently beside the abandoned shipping container. There was one thing he couldn't shake from his mind: the terrified look in Micah's eyes and the trembling voice from the boy's dream. "Dad, don't go." It wasn't a cry for help. It was the open wound of a child who no longer knew how to trust anyone. And Graham, though he never said it aloud, had begun to feel that turning his back again simply wasn't an option anymore. Houston, on a damp and chilly Monday afternoon, was blanketed in thick grey clouds. Like dust settled over the rooftops of the low-income neighborhoods. On the east side, the acrid smell of burning plastic drifted from the makeshift homes behind the Hopewell Market. The pavement glistened, soaked with old rainwater. In the midst of this grey sprawl, a small boy in a faded coat stumbled along the sidewalk, dragging a plastic bag stuffed with empty aluminum cans. Micah knew this route well. He had sold scrap here more than once. The fuller the bag, the more money they'd give him. And the sooner it filled up, the sooner he could return to his container, the one place where he at least had a clean blanket and a soft pillow that the man had brought him. He didn't know the man's name. He only remembered the eyes that didn't look at him the way grown-ups usually did. No pity, no cold detachment, just something broken. Micah hadn't slept the night before. His chest had been aching in waves, his heartbeat racing, then slowing without reason. He didn't tell anyone because there was no one to tell. Every breath felt tighter than the last. But still, he kept dragging that bag. He thought, if I can get $5 today, maybe tomorrow I can buy back that pair of old rubber shoes at the market corner. They won't soak through when it rains. The dizziness hit without warning. Everything blurred. His vision darkened. He grabbed onto a trash bin near the convenience store, head spinning. A middle-aged woman stepping out of the store caught sight of him just as he collapsed face first onto the sidewalk, his cheek striking the sharp edge of the curb, his knee scraped and bleeding. She screamed for help, then called 911. Some people stopped. Some turned away. She didn't care. The boy lay there, lips turning blue, one hand clutching his chest, completely still. She dropped to her knees beside him, hands trembling as she cradled his head. "Can you hear me, sweetheart? Just hold on. The ambulance is on its way." The ambulance arrived 5 minutes later, sirens cutting through the usual quiet of the neighborhood. They lifted the boy into the back, ran a quick check, and gave an early warning. Irregular heartbeat. Does he have a history of heart problems? Who's his guardian? No one knows, the woman replied, her voice catching in her throat. I just saw the boy dragging a trash bag and then collapse. He looked like he'd been living on the streets. There was a red bag. A young nurse knelt down and picked up the worn-out red bag lying beside the boy's frail body, which was slowly going limp on the sidewalk. The bag was covered in dust, its zipper frayed and torn, but tightly secured with a small piece of rope. She almost left it behind, but something about it made her stop. She carried the bag into the ambulance. After the vehicle had rolled along for a few minutes, she unzipped it to check inside. Apart from a few broken crumbs of crackers and a toy car missing a wheel, she found a folded, smudged greeting card. The writing inside was still legible. "If you ever need anything, just call. Graham Callahan." Beneath it, a phone number. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone and dialed. Graham was just wrapping up a virtual meeting when the screen flashed with an unknown number. He hesitated for a second, then answered. A woman's voice came through, urgent but clear. "Hello, I'm a nurse at St. Elora Emergency Center. We just admitted a little boy named Micah. Your card was found in his bag. He's unconscious and currently in critical care." Graham didn't respond. He was already on his feet, grabbing his coat, bolting from the room as if time itself was slipping away, heartbeat by heartbeat. He didn't even end the call properly. His keys clattered to the floor as he rushed to his car. At the first intersection, he didn't bother with the turn signal. He nearly ran a red light. Everything inside him screamed with a familiar desperation. Don't be late. Not again. He had been late once, and he had lost his son. At St. Elora Hospital, Graham burst through the doors of the emergency wing just as a pediatric gurney was being wheeled into the intensive diagnostics unit. He caught a glimpse. The boy lay still, an IV in his arm, wires connected to monitors, his pale face damp with sweat-drenched curls. Micah. A nurse stepped in front of him. "I'm sorry, sir. You can't go in. Only family is allowed in this area." "I'm the one he called," Graham said quickly, eyes locked on the treatment room door. "If he wakes up and doesn't see anyone, he'll run. And if he runs now, he'll die." There was no pleading in his tone, only a simple truth. The nurse paused, then slowly nodded. "Room 203. Dr. Elise will speak with you shortly." Dr. Elise Rowan entered the waiting room nearly an hour later. Her grey-brown hair was hastily pinned up. The sleeve of her white coat bore a fresh smear of blood near the cuff. She looked at Graham for a moment before opening the file. "What's the boy's name?" "Micah. I don't have a last name. I don't know if he has any papers. I just know he needs saving." She nodded, then began reading slowly, line by line. "The boy has congenital heart disease, a complex case, thin heart walls, left ventricle rhythm unstable. If this isn't surgically corrected within 2 weeks with intensive cardiac surgery and post-op care, he won't make it." Graham sank into the chair. He said nothing for a full minute. The only sound was the soft crinkle of the medical file in his hand as he clenched it. "We need a legal guardian, insurance documentation, or a treatment authorization. There are no records for Micah. No one is listed as his guardian. We can't operate without legal protection." "Elise." He spoke her name for the first time. "I lost a child once, because I was too late. This time, I won't let that happen." She looked him straight in the eye. Her gaze was still cool, but something in it paused. "I'll forward the file to the hospital's legal team," Elise said. "For now, we're keeping him stable with heart medication, but a decision needs to be made soon. Very soon." Graham stood up. He didn't return to the waiting area. He walked directly to the intensive care unit where Micah lay. The lights were dim. The monitor beeped steadily. The boy was asleep. His head sunk deep into the pillow, and beside him, the red bag, now washed, dried, and neatly placed, rested right where it had been. Graham sat down next to the bed. No one had given him permission, but no one stopped him either. He reached for the boy's small hand, cold, frail, but it began to warm in his grip. Micah stirred slightly, then opened his eyes, a dazed look in his gaze. Graham leaned in and whispered, "I'm here." Micah breathed softly. His eyes were blurred, but they stayed on him. His voice was barely a whisper, like wind brushing over leaves. "You're my dad, aren't you?" It wasn't a mistaken identity. It was an invitation, a quiet hope that the answer would be yes. Graham tightened his grip on the boy's hand. He didn't speak, but a tear fell onto that tiny hand. There was no need for words anymore. Micah smiled faintly, then drifted back to sleep. The heartbeat monitor continued its steady rhythm. Graham sat there until the hallway lights dimmed and the hospital settled into silence. When the nurse came back for the final check of the night, he stood up and gently adjusted the blanket over the boy. "Call the attorney. I'll sign whatever's needed," he said, his voice steady as stone. "I'll be that person, the one he can call Dad." Graham Callahan sat alone in the small administrative waiting room of St. Elora Hospital, where the once white walls had dulled to grey and the fluorescent lights hummed steadily above. In front of him was a thick manila file, the typewritten label slightly crooked. Micah, unknown. Surname, emergency admission, pediatrics. His fingers lightly gripped the edge of the folder as he slowly turned each page. A complex congenital heart defect, risk of acute heart failure, abnormally low oxygen levels. The nurse's notes detailed a history of untreated chronic coughing, suspected homelessness, malnutrition, and cardiac arrhythmia. The final page was blank under Guardian's name. Every line felt like a slap in the face, a stark reminder of how absurd the situation had become. A child was dying simply because no one had the legal right to let him live. The door swung open. A woman in a tailored suit entered, holding a clipboard. Behind her followed Dr. Elise Rowan and two hospital administrators. "Mr. Callahan, I'm Sandra Miles, the hospital's legal counsel," she began. "We understand that you wish to take responsibility for the patient, Micah. However, without documentation proving a relationship and without a formal guardianship petition, the hospital cannot proceed with major surgery without exposing itself to legal risk." Graham didn't rise. He set the file gently on the table and looked her directly in the eye. "What risk, ma'am?" "In the event the surgery fails, or if there are post-operative complications, the hospital could face litigation from a third party or from the state welfare system if there is no legally recognized guardian. We must verify familial ties, conduct DNA testing if necessary, and wait for court authorization." Graham cut in, his voice calm but heavy, like cold steel hitting the floor. "The boy won't live that long." Elise, who had been silent until now, turned to look at Graham. Her eyes held something unspoken. After a pause, she touched the edge of the folder. "I'm the primary physician. I confirm that if Micah doesn't undergo surgery within the next 10 days, he won't make it." Sandra nodded, but her expression remained unchanged. "We need a legally recognized guardian. A court can review an emergency petition, but it usually takes 5 to 7 business days. And Mr. Callahan, are you sure you want to do this?" Graham clenched his fist. For the first time in years, he felt no need to ask anyone's opinion, no need to balance old wounds against new decisions. He stood, not in anger, not for drama, just like a man who had accepted his fate. "I'll take the boy as my legal son. Today, put him on my insurance. If necessary, I'll sign off on full medical liability, and if anyone here is still hesitating, I'll call the press right now. I'll let this entire city know that a child was denied his right to live because he didn't have a stamp." The air in the room grew thick. Elise slowly rotated the pen in her hand, then looked up, her eyes locking on Graham. She nodded. "I'll stand with you, if it comes to that. I'll sign this file as the attending physician, confirming that the medical urgency justifies immediate surgery once someone accepts responsibility." Sandra opened her mouth as if to speak, but said nothing. She quickly scratched a few lines on her clipboard, eyes still lowered. And when she set the pen down, there wasn't a single doubt left in the room about what was happening. That night, as a light rain fell, Graham returned to his apartment. The fireplace remained unlit, the kitchen still and cold. He stood at his desk, where the landline phone, unused since Ethan's death, gathered dust. He picked it up and dialed. The line picked up after 3 rings. A man's voice, slow, slightly hoarse. Ben Whitaker speaking. Graham didn't waste time. "I need you to file an emergency petition for temporary guardianship. The boy's name is Micah. No last name. St. Elora Hospital. I'll send over all medical records by email. We go to court in the morning." Whitaker paused for a few seconds, then asked, without judgment, "Are you sure about this?" Graham looked out the window where the city lights blurred in the rain, and the red flash of a distant ambulance flickered like a wound. "I lost a child once, Ben. This time I won't let history repeat itself." Rain poured down over Houston. The windows of St. Elora Hospital were fogged with condensation, and the emergency room lights from the ground floor reflected upward like a red glow spilling from the chest of someone slowly bleeding. Inside, the third-floor surgical wing was as silent as a funeral that hadn't yet begun. The ceiling lights were harsh, but no one spoke. Everyone was waiting. All eyes were fixed on a white door where a metal plaque read, "Cardiothoracic Operating Room. Dr. Elise Rowan, Chief Surgeon." Graham Callahan stood by the window. He didn't sit. His coat was soaked, hair wet and clinging to his forehead. In his hand, he clutched a crumpled tissue, not to wipe away tears, but to keep his hand from trembling. His black leather shoes were streaked with mud and marked with dried paint from the bench in the hallway where he had tried unsuccessfully to find a moment of calm. There was none. Beyond that door, Micah was lying in the operating room, a small, fragile life, with a heart beating only because of medication, lungs breathing through tubes, and a future now hanging on the edge of human skill. Graham couldn't do anything. He couldn't fix it. He couldn't protect him. He couldn't trade places. He had been here before. Same hallway, same white walls, same soft footsteps of nurses passing by. Another child, another surgical bed, another wait. Ethan had died while Graham was responding to an urgent email from a European shareholder. He remembered the time, exactly 3:41 p.m. The meeting had lasted 11 minutes. By the time he entered the recovery room, all that was left was a white sheet covering his son's body. The nurse had cried. The doctor bit his lip and couldn't look him in the eye. And Graham, he hadn't cried. Because some pain runs so deep, the eyes forget how to weep. This time, he wasn't holding a phone, no laptop, no calls. He was just standing there and waiting, like a father should. The surgery went on. The first 2 hours passed with nothing but the sound of the surgical assistant's footsteps, rushing back and forth, carrying instruments, blood units, monitoring sheets. Elise hadn't left the room once. They said she once saved a baby girl, born at just 28 weeks, with a single incision, 1 suture, and 6 hours without blinking. Graham believed that. Heavy rain slammed against the windows. No one else in the hospital paid any mind to the weather outside. But Graham heard every drop. Each one fell like another minute slipping by, while Micah's heart remained unstitched, each drop like a weight of responsibility he couldn't ignore, even though no one had asked him to carry it. By the 3rd hour, a nurse came out and said, "The heart is open. We're working to construct an artificial valve. Pulse is weak." He closed his eyes and leaned back against the wall. He didn't pray. Graham hadn't believed in God since losing Ethan, but he believed in the woman performing the surgery, Elise, and in something else, that was slowly taking shape inside him. A feeling he couldn't quite name. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't duty. It was love. Love for a child who didn't share his blood. Hour 4. The light above the OR door was still red. Elise still hadn't come out. Graham's knees ached, but he didn't sit. He was afraid if he sat down, he might collapse. Almost without thinking, he pulled out his phone, opened the photo album. Ethan on his 6th birthday, his face smeared with cake, grinning from ear to ear. The last picture was of his son lying in a hospital bed, machines surrounding him, eyes closed, arms wrapped around a wooden toy robot. Micah had clung to something too these past few days. Not a robot, a red bag. At exactly 4:27 p.m., the operating room doors swung open. Elise stepped out first, her face slick with sweat, hair plastered behind her ears, droplets clinging to her face shield. She didn't speak right away. She stood still for a moment, as if she needed to gather herself before saying anything. Then she looked straight at Graham. "We saved the boy." There was no applause. No one hugged, no sighs of relief. Only Graham, who took a step back, then collapsed into a chair, his hands clutching his head. He didn't sob, but the tears came. For the first time in many years, he let himself cry. Not because of loss, but because one more life had not been lost. 2 hours later, Graham stood in the hallway. It was still drizzling outside. The cold wind slipped down the back of his collar, but he didn't feel a thing. He held his phone, dialing a number he knew by heart. "Ben, it's me." "Is it good news?" the voice on the other end asked quickly. "Good news," Graham said, "and I need you to get started, right away." "You mean?" "Start the adoption paperwork, as soon as possible. Not out of duty, but because I love that boy, like he's my own flesh and blood." There was no reply, just the quiet sound of keys clicking on a keyboard. Micah hadn't fully regained consciousness when Graham stepped into the recovery room the next morning. Tubes, heart monitors, and oxygen sensors were still attached all over the boy's body, but his skin was no longer as pale, and his breathing had become more steady. Elise left the monitoring chart on the table, gave a small nod, and quietly walked out, without saying much, just a whisper. "He's made it through. The rest is up to time." Graham sat down in the chair beside the bed. In his hands was a hardcover book, Where the Wild Things Are, the classic children's book Ethan used to know by heart. Graham didn't know whether Micah even liked books, but that wasn't why he was here. He was here to stay. No talking, no touching, no asking the boy to do anything at all. He read softly, just enough so that his voice filled the sterile white room. Maybe Micah could hear, maybe not. But what mattered was, Graham kept reading, day after day. On the second day, Micah opened his eyes, for longer this time. He saw Graham. He didn't panic, but he didn't smile either. He just looked like he couldn't quite believe he was still alive, still here, with this man. On the third day, a nurse tried to change his hospital gown. Micah froze up, his body tense, lashing out the moment he saw the white coat. His mouth didn't make a sound in time, but his hands shoved, as if someone had once held him down wearing that same kind of fabric. Graham entered. The nurse stepped back. He sat down, placed his hand on the bed rail, never touching the boy. "I hate white coats too," he said softly, not waiting for a reaction. "Especially the ones without a wrinkle on them. They look like scalpels with legs." Micah didn't reply, but his body loosened. Just a little. On the fourth day, Graham left a small wooden figure on the table, a hand-carved robot, about 3 inches tall, with a square head and round arms, just like the one Ethan used to clutch every night in his sleep. Graham said nothing, just left it there. But when he returned that evening, the robot was no longer on the table. It was in Micah's hand, resting gently in his small palm. Not tightly gripped, but held just enough to know. The boy had chosen to keep it with him. On the 5th day, Graham read aloud as usual. But this time, as he turned to page 7, a soft, broken voice whispered, "Your son. Did he like robots like I do?" The question was like a fragile thread, reaching directly from the hospital bed to the heart of the man sitting beside it. Without surprise or hesitation, Graham paused, closed the book, and smiled a gentle smile, like the morning sun finally slipping through the window. Yeah, he loved them. So much that once, he stuffed a hairdryer into a cardboard box, stuck 2 fan blades on it, and called it his flying robot invention. Then he blew the fuse for the entire floor. Micah let out a laugh, software barely audible. But it was the first real laugh he'd made since stepping into this story. A laugh that wasn't forced, that didn't need to be strong. It simply was a way of saying thank you. Graham nodded slightly, showing little on his face, but inside, something quietly bloomed warm, like a stove's glow in early winter. He spoke again, slower this time. He once told me he wished he had a little brother, not to play with, but to help guide him to the bathroom at night. He was scared of ghosts. Micah laughed more clearly. His hand tightened around the wooden robot. "Maybe," Graham said softly, eyes gazing into the distance. "That wish is finally coming true." The boy didn't answer, but the slow, gentle nod was enough. 1 week after the surgery, Micah was moved to the intensive recovery wing. The hospital had agreed to let Graham care for him as a temporary guardian, while Ben Whitaker's official adoption paperwork made its way to the court. Graham returned to his apartment, a spacious 2,000-square-foot loft that always felt empty. It used to be a place where Ethan's belongings were kept. Since his son's passing, Graham hadn't touched a thing. The wooden robots, the superhero cape, the half-built Lego set. Now, he cleared out the room. Not to erase the memories, but to share them. He repainted the walls. The ash grey turned into a calming olive green. He added blackout curtains to soften the morning light. A new dresser, new sheets, a low bookshelf, a world map taped on the wall with the words, "Where do you dream to go?" Graham didn't ask Micah what he wanted. He simply made it ready. The day before discharge, Graham sat by the hospital bed, resting one hand on the safety rail. He looked at Micah, who was carefully coloring in a paper robot, and lowered his voice. "Micah, if you'd like, you can come stay with me for a while. No one will force you to do anything. But I'd really like to take care of you, if you'll let me." Micah didn't respond right away. He looked down at the red bag in his lap. After a long pause, he whispered, without looking up, "My dad once promised if I behaved, he'd come get me. But then, he never came back. So now, I'm not sure who keeps their promises." Graham swallowed hard. Then he spoke, slowly. "I'm not here to replace your dad. But if you'll let me, I'll be the one who stays." Micah looked up. His eyes were tired, but bright. He nodded, very gently. "I want to go with you." The day Micah was discharged, the weather was cool and clear. No rain. He sat in a wheelchair, holding the red bag, not clinging to it like before, but simply carrying it. When the car pulled up in front of the apartment building, Micah looked up at the tall structure, with its gleaming glass windows. "This is your place?" he asked. Graham crouched beside him, tapped him lightly on the forehead and said, "I think now's the right time to call it our place, don't you?" Micah looked at him. No smile, no nod. But his eyes held no trace of fear. For the first time, he stepped into a place called home, without bringing fear along. 3 weeks earlier, Graham had filed a petition with the New Haven State Department of Family Services to adopt Micah. The paperwork was thicker than he had anticipated. Each sheet represented an investigation, a background check, or an independent interview between him and Micah. Elise, the physician directly in charge of Micah's care, had submitted a 3-page medical affidavit, firmly stating that no one was more qualified to care for the boy than Graham Callahan. Yet despite his goodwill, legal standing, and a complete application, Graham was still summoned to a closed-door hearing at City Hall. No public audience, no recording equipment, just Graham, his attorney, a representative from Social Services, and Victor Hale, the state's chief legal counsel, who had twice denied Graham's petition on the grounds of lack of genetic proof and unclear personal history of the child. After nearly an hour of debate behind closed doors, Graham stepped out, his heart heavy. They hadn't rejected him outright, but they hadn't approved him either. Just a vague promise. "We'll take it under further review." The soft creak of rubber wheels echoed across the marble floor. Micah sat quietly in the vast hallway of City Hall, clutching a chipped wooden robot model in both hands. Graham sat beside him, a gentle hand resting on the boy's shoulder, eyes fixed on the large wooden door at the end of the hall, the one he'd just exited minutes earlier. The adoption draft still held the warmth of his attorney's hand, but Graham's own heart had gone cold with every word of hesitation he'd just heard. "Has Micah eaten anything?" Graham asked, voice low but carefully tender. "I had the cookies in your bag," the boy replied, with a small smile. His eyes were a little tired, but bright. There was no trace left of the tattered homeless child once curled behind a washing machine. It was a long step, a new chapter. But standing in the way was a wall named Victor Hale. Conference Room 3, 4th floor, State Social Services Office. Victor Hale, Director of Child Welfare Services, sat upright with thin glasses perched on his nose, voice flat, as if reading minutes from a shareholders' meeting. "Mr. Graham Adler," he began, without inflection, "we recognize your good intentions. However, the boy, Micah, has no legal documentation whatsoever. No birth certificate, no social security number, no verified parental guardians. No one knows where the child came from." Attorney Ben Whitaker placed his hand on the table, trying to keep his voice steady. "We have submitted all medical records, treatment documentation, a signed copy of the adoption petition, and a formal statement from the attending physician." "None of that holds legal weight," Victor interrupted. "By law, to adopt a child, one must either obtain parental consent from the birth parents or a court declaration of abandonment. This file contains no such documentation. There is nothing here proving who abandoned whom. And a child cannot testify on his own behalf." Graham gripped the armrest tightly, his chest tight, with the same kind of pressure he'd once felt in an operating room years ago when the doctor had said to him, "I'm sorry, we couldn't save Ethan." This time, it was another child, another fragile life. But the difference was, this time, he still had time to fight. "Elise!" Graham stood up, calling out. Dr. Elise, who had personally performed Micah's heart surgery, stepped in, holding a detailed medical file, along with pre-op and post-op scans, and a full surgical report. "I'm a medical witness," she said, her eyes locked on Victor. "This child nearly died from a congenital heart defect. No one came for him. No one asked about him. Graham was the only one who stayed by his side throughout the entire recovery. Victor leaned back in his chair and shook his head. I'm not questioning Mr. Adler's affection, but this is the law, and I don't set precedents. Precedent? Graham stepped forward, voice thick with emotion. What about the precedent of neglect? Of a child dying on a sidewalk because no one dared to break protocol? Of an old man holding a boy coughing up blood but too afraid to lift him for fear of breaking the rules? Is that the precedent you want to protect? The room fell silent. Only the ceiling fan could be heard spinning slowly above them. Victor adjusted his glasses and replied coldly, "We will review this matter once more legal evidence is presented. Until then, Mr. Graham has no legal right to care for or adopt Micah. If he insists on doing so, he could be charged with unlawful custody." News began to spread quickly when Diana Flores, an independent journalist who had once read Graham's War and Justice columns, published a story titled, "A Man Who Wants to Be a Father Stopped Because Kindness Isn't in the Procedure." The article featured a photo of Graham and Micah sitting by a hospital window, reading together. In just 24 hours, it had over 10,000 shares. The comments were filled with tears, outrage, and support. "That's the first time I saw that child smile since arriving at the hospital. We built a system to protect children, not to imprison the human heart." That afternoon, in an apartment freshly painted olive green, Graham stood by the window and called his attorney, Ben. "They don't get it, Ben. I'm not doing this to atone for anything. I'm doing it because I truly see him as family." Ben sighed. "I know, but we need a different approach. If the boy ever visited a community center, if anyone saw him wandering alone, we might be able to find a witness who can confirm he was abandoned." Graham looked toward Micah's room, the door slightly ajar, the soft click of Lego bricks coming from inside. He nodded. "Do it. This time, I'm not waiting for the system to grow a conscience. I'm going to force it to face its own humanity." At a small press conference a few days later, Graham spoke to a cluster of reporters. "If this system has no place for unwanted children, then maybe it's us, the adults, the lawmakers, who are the real orphans. Orphans of compassion." Camera flashes lit up the room. But Graham didn't need applause. He needed only one thing: the legal right to call that boy his son. Graham stepped up onto the makeshift wooden platform. The wind blew through his coat, stirring his salt and pepper hair gently. Micah sat below, among the crowd. No one paid attention to the video camera. No one raised their phones. The scene before them was too real to need a screen. He looked down, his voice calm. "I'm not here to beg anyone to accept a child. I just want to remind you, we were once that child. Each of us once hoping someone would come back and say, 'I didn't abandon you.'" He paused, his eyes locking onto the crowd. The system may reject Micah, but the character of a community it cannot. We have a choice: follow the procedure or follow our hearts. The small square fell silent, then one clap, another. Soon the whole neighborhood joined in. The applause wasn't loud or frantic, but steady, certain, and sincere. Behind the crowd, Victor Hale, the Director of Social Welfare, stood silently. The speech was being streamed live on the local news site. His office received nearly 3,000 emails that very afternoon. The federal court called. A prosecutor proposed reopening Micah's case to investigate abandonment and create a special record to issue a birth certificate. Elise signed an additional medical affidavit confirming the lack of a legal guardian. Micah was pushed forward into the crowd just as the sun set. The sliding glass door behind him closed quietly, like shutting the door on a past hidden in darkness. He held a bouquet of jasmine, saying nothing, but his face beamed. Graham stepped down, taking the boy's hand. Diana, standing in a corner, captured the moment with a no-flash photo. That photo soon appeared across every regional news outlet, when a father's heart touches the conscience of a whole community. That night, in a small apartment, Graham hung a wooden sign, "Micah's Corner, a place for my son." Micah asked, "Uncle, do you still want me to be your son?" Graham paused, sat down, and looked straight into his eyes. "No, Micah, not because I want it, but because I can't imagine this life without you." Micah smiled. For the first time, that smile carried no shadows. 3 months later. Spring wind swept through the row of maples in front of the porch, young leaves trembling in the morning sunlight. Graham's mansion, once filled only with the ticking of clocks and the smell of cold coffee, now echoed with small footsteps, bursts of laughter, and the scent of freshly baked cookies. The windows were wide open. On the table lay drawings of robots and trains, alongside a scribbled portrait with the words slanted in pencil. "Me and Dad." In the backyard, where a cold wooden table and chairs once stood, there was now a small playground with a swing, a sandbox, and an oak branch holding a red bag. Micah was healthy. He had grown a little taller. His hair had thickened, and his eyes shone with sharpness. He had started school. On his first day, he wore the shirt Graham had bought, not designer, but clean, well-pressed, and with the name Micah Whitmore stitched inside the cuff. Every night before bed, he wrote a few lines in his journal. No one asked him to. It had simply become a new habit. Today, the teacher asked me, "How many people are in your family?" I answered, "One, my dad, but it feels like I have a whole army behind me." I don't dream of cold nights anymore. One afternoon, Graham took Micah to the small cemetery north of town, where his son, Ethan Jr., had been laid to rest 6 years earlier. No trumpets, no tears, just a firm clasp of hands. 2 figures stood before the grey stone monument. Graham knelt down, gently brushing his fingers over the carved name. "My son, I kept my promise. You once asked me, do I have any siblings? Now you do." Micah placed a wooden robot model, the one he had built himself, before the grave. He said nothing. But as they walked away, he glanced back and quietly raised his hand in a small salute. "Brother Ethan, I'm Micah." On the way home, a light rain began to fall. Neither of them hurried for cover. Father and son walked slowly beneath the porch. When they arrived home, Graham opened the door and was surprised to see the red bag hanging from the oak tree in the front yard. Micah had hung it there while he was outside. That bag, the only thing Micah had carried through his wandering life, now hung quietly, like a memory folded away, no longer needing to be carried. Micah looked up, smiled, then turned to Graham. "Dad, let's not do laundry at the old place anymore." "Why is that, son?" "Because our home is clean now." A simple statement. But Graham understood. Clean here didn't mean clothes or floors. It meant the heart. It meant the stains of the past had been washed away. It meant forgiveness for oneself, for fate, for days no one deserved. That night, before turning off the light, Graham opened his computer and completed the official adoption paperwork. The last line he wrote was a heartfelt note to the court. "I once lost a child because I didn't arrive in time. Today, I choose to love a child, not because I owe him anything, but because I refuse to live in a world where children have to wait for someone to arrive in time." Micah didn't come to fill a void. He came to open a new door inside me, and I will never let that door close again. Some encounters seem accidental, yet become the turning points that change a life. Micah didn't choose where he was born, but he was chosen by a man who had lost everything and dared to open his heart once more. This story is not just the journey of a child saved, it is the journey of a man learning to be a father again, not by blood, but by heart. Do you believe that a small action from you can save someone lost in darkness? Have you ever seen someone in need, but walked past, thinking it wasn't your concern? Please share your thoughts in the comments I read, and listen carefully to every word you write. And if today you feel tired or lonely, please remember, there is always someone out there ready to listen, to believe in you, and to care for you without needing a reason.